Earl Dawson here. Last October, I found a rat nest the size of a football under a patch of pigweed behind my tool shed. 6 babies, pink and blind, tucked into a nest made of chewed-up burdock leaves and my daughter's missing garden glove. I had walked past that patch 100 times that summer. I never once thought a weed could be the reason mice and rats were setting up house 20 feet from my back door. I just thought I had bad luck with rodents. Turns out I had good weeds, if you're a rat. That nest changed how I look at my yard. I started pulling on gloves and walking the property line every weekend, checking what was growing where nobody planned it, and I found 8 weeds doing more to invite rodents onto my property than the open bag of birdseed in my garage ever did. Some of these you already have. A few of them you probably water on purpose because you think they're just part of the lawn. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which ones to pull, which ones to just cut back, and which ones you can leave alone without losing a wink of sleep. Before I get into the list, understand what a rodent actually wants from your yard. It's food, it's cover, and it's a path that keeps it hidden from hawks and cats and neighborhood dogs on the way to both. A mouse doesn't cross open lawn if it can help it. Open ground means a red-tailed hawk gets a clean shot, and a barn cat 2 yards over gets a clean run at it. So a mouse plans its whole night around staying under something. Weeds, hand, rodents, all 3 needs at once, for free, without a single trip to the store. A tall stand of grass gives a mouse cover to travel under without a bird ever seeing it. A seed head gives it dinner. A tangled mat of vine gives it a place to build a nest where a shovel will never reach. Once you start looking at your yard the way a rat does, low and hungry and worried about getting eaten, the whole picture gets a lot less confusing. I also want to say up front that I am not a wildlife biologist. I'm just a guy who got tired of finding droppings in his shed and decided to figure out why. What I'm sharing here came from a season of pulling things up, watching what happened after, and paying closer attention than I ever had before. Some of it lines up with what extension offices and pest control folks say. Some of it I just noticed on my own property. Take it for what it is. I've compiled all these traditional methods into a manual. The link is in the description. Weed number 1 is foxtail. If you've got that bristly, tail-shaped grass showing up along your fence or at the edge of the lawn where the mower doesn't quite reach, you're growing a rodent buffet. Each seed head can carry a couple hundred seeds, and mice and rats eat those seeds the way we'd eat popcorn at a movie, one handful after another without really stopping to think about it. I pulled about 30 stalks of foxtail out from behind my propane tank last summer, and when I looked closer at the base of the clump, there were tunnel openings running underneath it, packed dirt worn smooth by little feet going in and out. The grass wasn't just feeding them, it was hiding the door to their house. Foxtail also seeds early and seeds fast, sometimes putting out a second flush after you think you've already dealt with it for the season. Pull it by the root before it goes to seed, bag it, and get it off your property. Do not toss it on the compost pile. The seeds survive that just fine, and you'll be replanting the problem come spring without ever meaning to. Weed number 2 is lamb's quarters. It looks almost pretty, with that dusty gray-green leaf, and a shape that looks a little like spinach if you squint, and a lot of people let it grow along the garden bed because they mistake it for something they planted on purpose. One mature lamb's quarters plant can drop over 70,000 seeds in a season. That number sounds made up, but it's not. And it's exactly why this plant shows up on more than one university extension list as a rodent food source. Rats and mice will strip the seed heads clean before the plant even finishes drying out on its own. If you've got a vegetable garden, check the edges of it right now, especially the part closest to a fence or a shed wall. Lamb's quarters loves disturbed soil, which means it loves the exact same dirt you just turned over to plant tomatoes and peppers. The irony is that gardeners are often the ones feeding this problem without realizing it, because tilling the soil is what gives lamb's quarters the perfect start. Weed number 3 is pigweed, also called amaranth by the folks who like a fancier name for it. This is the one that got me, the one growing behind my shed when I found that nest. Pigweed grows tall, sometimes waist high, and the stalk gets thick and woody at the base as the season goes on. That thick stalk matters because it gives rodents something sturdy to climb and hide against, not just soft grass that bends flat under their weight. The seed heads are heavy with tiny black seeds that rats particularly go after, and a single plant can produce an enormous number of them by late summer. I've since learned to pull pigweed while it's still young, and the stalk snaps easy in your hand. Wait too long and you're fighting a plant with roots like a small tree, and by then the nest underneath it might already be occupied. Weed number 4 is bindweed, the vine some people call wild morning glory because of the small white flowers it puts out. This one doesn't feed rodents so much as it houses them. Bindweed grows fast, wraps around fences, spreads flat across the ground in a dense mat, and creates a woven canopy that a mouse can travel under for the length of your whole yard without ever stepping into open air. I found a run of flattened grass under a bindweed patch near my compost bin, worn smooth from repeated traffic, like a little highway with regular commuters. Pulling bindweed is a pain because the roots snap off and regrow from whatever's left behind in the soil, so you have to stay on it every couple weeks through the growing season, instead of pulling it once and calling it done. It's tedious work. It's also one of the few weeds on this list that's more about shelter than food, so if your yard has more cover than seed and you're still finding activity, this vine is probably why. Weed number 5 is wild blackberry bramble, and I want to be honest with you, I actually like having a little bit of this around. Free blackberries in July are hard to argue with, and my kids look forward to it every summer. But an untamed bramble patch, especially one that's been left alone for a couple of seasons, turns into a fortress. The thorns that keep you out do the same thing to cats, hawks, and dogs, which means rats can nest right in the center of it, with almost nothing that hunts them able to get close enough to bother. If you're going to keep bramble, keep it trimmed low and thinned out so daylight actually gets down to the middle of it. A bramble patch you can see through is a lot less inviting than one that's grown into a solid wall you can't even push your hand into. Weed number 6 is burdock, the plant with the big broad leaves and the burrs that stick to your socks and your dog's fur every fall. Rodents use burdock 2 ways. The seed burrs themselves are a food source, and the wide leaf canopy near the ground creates shade and moisture that mice like to nest under, especially during the hottest stretch of summer when everything else has dried out. I found burdock growing thick along the north side of my garage, in the one strip of yard that never really dries out no matter how hot it gets, and that's exactly the kind of damp, shaded spot rodents look for when they're picking a nesting site. Dig burdock out by the taproot. It's deep, sometimes over a foot down, and if you just cut the top off, it'll come right back within a few weeks like nothing happened. Weed number 7 is chickweed. It grows low, it grows fast, and it carpets bare patches of soil in cool weather when most other plants are still waking up for the season. On its own, chickweed isn't much of a rodent food source, but it draws in a lot of small insects, and those insects draw in mice looking for an easy meal on their way past. It's a supporting player, not the main event, the same way clover works in a lot of yards, without anybody thinking twice about it. Where I really noticed it was along the base of my raised garden beds, growing in that narrow gap between the wood frame and the grass. That gap turned out to be a favorite travel corridor for mice moving between the garden and the shed, and the chickweed was giving them both cover and a snack along the way, all in a strip of dirt about 4 inches wide. Weed number 8 is ragweed. Most people know ragweed as the plant that wrecks their allergies every August, but it's also a heavy seed producer that rats and mice go after once the pollen season winds down and the seed heads mature and dry. Ragweed tends to grow tall and coarse along fence lines and in neglected corners of the yard. the exact spots most of us walk past without a second look, because there's nothing pretty about it. I had a stand of it along the back fence for 2 summers before I even bothered to identify what it was. Once I pulled it and cleared that corner out, I noticed a lot less mouse activity near the garage door closest to it. I can't prove the two were connected with a clipboard and a study. The timing was hard to ignore. Now, pulling these 8 weeds isn't going to solve a rodent problem by itself, and I don't want to oversell it to you. If you've got an open trash can, a bird feeder that spills onto the ground every morning, or a woodpile stacked right against the house, those are still going to bring rodents in no matter how clean your weed situation is. What pulling these weeds does is take away the easy food and the easy cover, which makes your yard a lot less worth the trip for a mouse deciding where to set up for the winter. It's closing doors. It's not locking the whole house. A few things I've learned about doing this the right way, mostly from getting it wrong the first time around. Pull weeds before they go to seed, whenever you can manage it. Once those seed heads dry out and drop, you've lost the fight for that season, no matter how many plants you remove afterward, because the seeds are already sitting in the soil, waiting for next year. Wear gloves. Some of these, especially burdock and blackberry, will leave your hands scratched up and covered in burrs if you go in bare-handed like I did the first time. And bag what you pull instead of leaving it in a pile at the edge of the yard to deal with later. A pile of pulled weeds with seed heads still attached is just a buffet you moved 6 feet to the left. I also want to say something about timing, because this tripped me up the first year I tried to get ahead of it. Spring is when a lot of these weeds are easiest to pull. The roots are shallow, and the ground is soft from rain, so it feels productive and satisfying. But mid to late summer is when the seed heads mature and rodent activity really picks up. So if you only do one big pull in spring and then walk away for the rest of the year, you'll be right back where you started by August. I do a walkthrough every 3 or 4 weeks from April through September now. It takes maybe 20 minutes if the yard hasn't gotten too far ahead of me, and closer to an hour if I let it slide for a month. I want to answer a few questions people asked me after I first mentioned this to some folks in my neighborhood, because I think they're worth covering straight instead of leaving them hanging. Does pulling weeds actually get rid of rodents already living on the property, or does it just stop new ones from showing up? Mostly the second. If you already have an active nest under a patch of pigweed or bindweed, pulling that patch is going to disturb the nest and push the rodents to relocate, but it will not trap or remove the ones already there. You're taking away the house, not catching the tenant. If you know you've got an active infestation, you still need traps, exclusion work around your foundation, or a call to a professional. Weed control is about making sure the next generation doesn't have anywhere to move in. Will pulling weeds just push the rodents onto my neighbor's property instead of getting rid of them? A neighbor asked me this after I told him what I'd found behind my shed. Fair question. The honest answer is that rodents don't think in terms of property lines. They think in terms of food and cover. If your yard stops offering both, they don't hold a grudge and set up shop next door out of spite. They just stop finding your yard worth the trip, and they go wherever the next easy meal and patch of cover happens to be. If your whole street has the same tall grass and untrimmed fence lines, you're fighting an uphill battle no matter what you do on your own quarter acre. But your yard specifically becomes a lot less attractive, and that matters more than people think. How do I know if a weed patch actually has rodents in it before I go pulling it apart with my bare hands? Look for flattened trails through the grass. Small holes at the base of the plant clump about the width of a quarter, and droppings, which look like small dark grains of rice scattered near the entrance. If you see any of that, wear gloves, use a rake or a hoe to disturb the area first from a distance rather than reaching straight in, and give it a minute before you start pulling by hand. I learned that lesson the hard way behind my tool shed. Do I need to worry about these weeds if I don't live near woods or an open field? Not as much, but don't assume you're safe. Rats and mice do plenty well in dense neighborhoods too, moving along fence lines, under sheds, and through the narrow gaps between houses. A single overgrown corner in a small suburban yard can be enough, especially if it sits near a garage, a compost pile, or a trash area. Size of the yard matters less than what's actually growing in the corners nobody looks at. One more thing worth mentioning. Not every weed on your property is a rodent risk, and I don't want you out there tearing up every green thing that isn't grass. Plenty of common lawn weeds, dandelion for instance, aren't heavy rodent draws on their own, and clover mostly just annoys people who want a perfect lawn rather than actually feeding anything larger than a beetle. It's the tall seed producers, the dense ground cover, and the thorny shelter plants that do the real damage. Learn to spot those 8, and you can leave the rest of the yard alone and save yourself a weekend. After I cleared that pigweed patch and the burdock along the garage, I went 2 full months without finding a single dropping in the shed, which for my yard was close to a record. My wife noticed before I even told her what I'd done. She just said the shed didn't smell like mouse anymore, which is about as clear a review as I could ask for from someone who never once complimented my yard work before that. If you've walked your own yard after watching this and found one of these 8 growing somewhere you didn't expect, leave a comment and tell me which one it was. I'd like to know if pigweed and bindweed are as common in other yards as they turned out to be in mine, or if certain regions deal with a different set entirely. And if this helped you look at your backyard a little differently, stick around, because next time I'm digging into what's living under your woodpile, and it's probably more than firewood.